Welcome back. We're discussing Canada's fertility crisis, and with some ideas as to how we got here and what can happen to make it better is Dr. Michael Bonner, who is joining us again, an author of an excellent piece. I encourage you to read it at the C2C Journal. Michael, in your piece, you mentioned, and you referred to this earlier in the previous segment, that immigration is not a long-term solution to fertility decline. Can you explain why not?
The simple answer is that fertility rates are falling everywhere. Now, unless you have, this is not to say that immigration will just suddenly stop. It won't. But if you don't have a large surplus population of relatively young people abroad who are mobile, well educated, and who want to seek their fortune in Canada or in some other Western country, you won't have the kind of large numbers of migrants that we saw at the end of the 20th century and that we have seen in recent days. There was a time, for example, in Canadian history when most immigration came from uh, 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 Britain and France,
Hmm.
and then uh, Central and Eastern Europe. Well, that isn't viable anymore. Not to say that there are no immigrants, but that's much less viable than it once was before, simply
Well,
because there
also,
aren't huge.
yeah, there aren't huge populations in these countries any longer. They like Italy is one of the has one of the
Yes,
lower birth rates in all of Italy, in all of Europe rather.
exactly. So nowadays, one of the largest surplus populations. I mean, I don't really like that term surplus, but you know what I mean. That there is a large demographic of well-educated, well-trained young people from in India who have sought their fortune in the West, and consequently, that's one of our biggest source countries right now. But
Hmm.
that and not merely coincidentally, the birth rate there is significantly higher than it is in neighboring countries in Southeast Asia, and certainly much higher than it is in China. But it is falling there too.
And what is the birth rate in India? Do you know that stat off the top of your head?
Right now, it's about 2.5, 2.6 TFR, but that is falling rapidly. It's in fact falling
Wow.
more rapidly than it is even in Europe and America. So realistically, those numbers are going to fall. So, if we have an economic model in which we depend upon a large influx of newcomers from abroad, it stands to reason that we are not going to be able to depend on that influx much longer, simply because uh, the larger surplus won't be there. That's point number one. Point number two is those countries they will have an incentive to hold on to their own
Right.
populations. And I think that we can also raise in a Canadian and in a generally Western context, we can seriously raise the ethical and moral concerns of trying to essentially poach a well-educated population abroad when there are increasingly fewer such people. In our own case, we will have to find some new economic model to deal with this problem. Now, people look at things like artificial intelligence or automation and so forth, uh, and they may have very solid points to make about ratcheting up productivity, and there may be something to be said about a new industrial boom that could come from that kind of thing. But last time I checked, robots and algorithms don't buy things, and they can't be taxed. So that's not going to maintain the level of prosperity or the kind of social welfare state that we're used to.
It's interesting as a little anecdote. So I have five children. I remember when I had four, and people were when I was in Toronto, were sort of aghast. Oh, you have four kids. And I remember one time, without a filter, just blurting to this woman in the supermarket. I said, "Well, who do you think is going to be paying your pension?" Right? Like these kids are the future. But it's true, because if we don't have, as you mentioned, that young tax base coming in, and if these countries are themselves, that where we currently have a lot of immigration from, are wanting to hold on to their own citizens, then what are the options? It sounds like we need to have more kids.
Well, that's my view. I have three, and I'm I'm doing my best. But this is the kind of policy discussion that we need to have in this country.
Okay, and when we come back from this commercial break, we're going to have that discussion and say, why is it important that Canadians have more kids? We'll be right back.